And happy Tuesday, everyone. If you're watching this in social media world live today, it is Tuesday. So happy Tuesday. I don't know why that's something I wanted to say, but I did. So happy Tuesday. So
I was in the bank this morning. I was in the bank this morning doing some stuff, and they hadn't changed over their sign yet. So I said, "Happy Monday," and they were like, "Wait, it's Tuesday." I'm like, "It's no. I like the sign. The sign." So.
Monday the sequel. So yeah, it could be that. So that's fine. But you're joining us for Business Acceleration Playbook, where we are bringing you the plays that you need to win in your business. And today we're going to be talking about the fall of the hustle culture. So I don't know, Tim, if you want to jump in and kind of explain to people that don't even know what that term hustle culture means, but I don't know if you want to dive in and kind of explain that from your perspective.
Man, there's a lot of different ways I think it's been introduced. I've lived in the e-commerce space for quite some time, and it was very, very prevalent in the e-commerce where you have to continue to work night and day, and if you're not actually like burning the candle at both ends. They didn't call it that, but basically, if you're not burning the candle at both ends and you're not grinding away almost a 24/7, and it was almost like a badge of pride to say that I stayed up all night and I worked all night trying to put this campaign together or this funnel together. And I saw it so much. The other place I saw it a lot, and I think it was a misinterpretation. Am I lagging again?
Just a little bit, but go ahead. You're good.
Okay, so I think it's a misinterpretation. But when Gary Vee first started talking, he talked about the grind and he talked about the hustle. And when I first was introduced to Gary Vee, I was really turned off by the whole hustle and grind theories that he was putting out there. And I don't believe that he thinks that way any longer. But when I first was introduced, I was like, man, this is where this is coming from. And it's just not healthy. It's not productive in the long term. There are no scientific facts. There's no health. There's nothing beneficial to this except for to really what I started calling was an implode nature of people. So it's definitely what I feel like is a false narrative, and I think it's a big problem. And I love the title of what we're talking about. It's the fall of the hustle, because I think there's a lot of people waking up and finding out like, look, we need to take care of our holistic selves on all fronts, not just try to focus on the business and then basically implode like I've seen so many business owners do.
Absolutely. Well, and I think there's a couple of parts to that. I think the mentality of the business world years ago was very much like you were mentioning. It was that, work, hashtag hustle, hashtag grind, type of mentality. And for business owners who were going from working corporate in that mentality, transitioning into their own business, you do what you know. So they were getting into their own businesses with that same mentality. And I say I was also a part of that because I thought to be able to be successful in my own business, that's what I had to do. I had to, as you mentioned, burn the candle at both ends. I, would work throughout the day as I could and take care of my family, and then stay up all hours of the night trying to get things done, not even effectively. I can remember falling asleep at my laptop and waking up and trying to work a little more, falling asleep and waking up and trying to work anymore. Not effective. I would probably spend, 5 or 6 hours and get, I would say, probably 30 minutes worth of good work done. So, I mean, it's looking at it now, it seems ridiculous, but at the time, I remember thinking that's what I had to do because that's what everyone did, quote unquote, right?
Well, and that's what everybody was saying that they did, but
absolutely.
not effectively.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and you were talking about there's no scientific studies, and honestly, I think there's the opposite. There are lots of scientific studies, that are supporting the well-rested. Yes. I think. Well, the reason I titled that The Fall of the Hustle Culture was because I think it is. I think you mentioned people are waking up. I think they are very much waking up, and there's numerous reasons for that. But I think one of the reasons is for a lot of us, we woke up when we burnt out. We didn't have reason. Yeah.
And that's the implode that I'm talking about. Is some of that imploding is we just realized we have nothing left in any of our tanks to be able to even function in life. So it's just even from our own personal perspectives, we struggle to be able to function Two is we can't show up for our families the way that it's needed. So I don't care if you're a father or a mother or a husband or wife or whatever. I don't care where you fit in that. If you can't show up for your partner or you can't show up for those that are relying on you, it's a zero-sum game, and it's a loser's game, you know? So it's just we have nothing left to be able to give to our families, to give to the community, to society, and we think that we're doing something great. In reality, we're hurting not only ourselves, but everybody around us.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that for the people that didn't already wake up because they burn out like me, I think a lot of people during I hate to use this as an example, but it's what I got. So during the shutdown, when everybody was being forced to kind of stop for a while, I think they realized that, wow, okay, I didn't realize how exhausted I was.
Yeah.
I didn't realize all the things I was doing just because they weren't fruitful things. I thought I needed to do them, and I was even in that boat. I had already kind of came out of that hustle and grind mentality for the most part, but there was still some things that I had hung on to that I thought I needed to do, that when I stopped doing them, I figured out, oh, that actually made no difference at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there is a lot of, ways that people can kind of start to figure out that maybe they have a problem with balance. I think I would term that a problem with balance in a lot of ways. And I know that you have a lot to say on that subject.
Well, the balance, I think, is so we are dealing with two different concepts here, and I want to be really clear. So first of all, when we define the hustle, what I feel like is necessary is to say that it is important to give 110% when we're there.
Mm-hmm.
What has turned the hustle into a toxic trait is that we attempt to burn the candle at both ends. We attempt to work 24-hour days. We attempt to give more than we have to be able to give. So a proper hustle, and I mean, like you follow sports, and we'll talk about balance in a second. But if you follow sports, it's a good quality trait to say that guy hustles a lot. I mean, he runs his buns off. He's given 110%. I fully endorse that definition.
Absolutely.
And so I want to be really clear about that. So yes, you've got to work hard. Yeah, you got to put the time in. Yeah, but there comes a certain point in time where the opposite aspect has to be true, where we have the ability to disconnect, to rest, to be able to turn things off, so that way we can now fill up our energy tanks, our emotional tanks, whatever you want to call them. We can fill that up. So now we can show back up and perform at a high level that is needed for an entrepreneur, a business owner, a high level C-suite, CEO, whatever. So that's one kind of a thing. That's the fall of the hustle. I want to really kind of almost get back to what it was originally intended for, rather than this crazy cockamamie kind of definition that we've really come to accept in our society. Now, turn the page. Balance. Balance is another thing that I feel like we have adopted a false sense of what balance actually is, which has led to the whole aspect of the hustle, where we feel like we have to do more, show up more, be more, because in the definition of what we've accepted for balance is that we have, I picture it this way. So many people, when they step in and say, I need to have balance in my life, what they're intending is, I've got this balance beam that I'm going to walk down. On the right side, I've got my business, and on the left side, I've got my family. And I have to keep them perfectly aligned, perfectly in balance. And then I'm going to try to walk this tightrope, or this balance beam, which is my personal life, and try to keep everything right inside. Now, you and I both know, I mean, we've been through enough experiences. What happens when? And you guys can fill in the blank. What happens when a partnership goes bad? What happens when we're facing bankruptcy? What happens when we can't get the finances? What happens when our supplier doesn't supply? What happens when we have COVID? What happens when all of that stuff happens in our business? And then on the opposite side, what happens when our spouse gets cancer? We lose a child. We have a traumatic event that happens in our life. What happens then? And it's impossible to be able to say that we walk hand in hand, perfectly balanced on these things, because when that happens, you fill in whatever that is, suddenly we now have to dedicate more time, more energy, more emotion to whatever that experience is. So when we say what happens when, now it's demanding, saying, I have to have time from you. I have
Yeah.
to have energy. I've got to take your emotions and I've got to have that. And so now we're like, okay, it's breaking my brain. So if we are in that hustle mentality, so let's tie this all together. If we're in that hustle mentality, we're saying we got to keep everything balanced. That means if I have to commit more time to my family, and that's rising, now I have to commit more time to my business to keep things equal. And I'm going to start showing up more and more and more. And then what happens internally is we start to die. And
Or
that has a
maybe even
lot of
externally.
I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah.
scientific evidence that shows that our bodies literally start to die.
Yep.
And we've got anxiety on the rise. We've got mental health orders. And then it shows up physically in our joints and the arthritis and all of these
Yeah.
other things that are starting to show up. And we're like, man, I didn't have that pain in my shoulder yesterday. What's going on? Well, it's the carrying of that stress. And we're trying to do more and more. And we're not taking care of ourselves. So I would propose this is the way that we should look at balance as a fulcrum. We should be the fulcrum underneath the things and then adjusting for our priorities. Now, so instead of saying I'm going to be on top trying to balance this way, I'm actually going to be underneath and we have these plates, whatever you want to call it, they're all kind of circling. And when things weigh more and demand more of our time, we shift our time and our energy to that part. So if it's business, family, now keep in mind, and this is very true, if we shift too much and we stay too much focused on one, well, what happens with the other? It starts to really start to get weighed down. And I mean, everything starts to fall. So we have to constantly be shifting our priorities back and forth to meet those demands. It's never going to be perfectly fair. It's never going to be
Absolutely.
perfectly even. It's just not going to happen. And when we can understand that concept and we can start adjusting and say, okay, you know what? This month is going to be a busy month. It's Black Friday. We've got November is our highest selling times. We've got to focus. We're in sales, retail, whatever. We know that means you take time off in January when things are slow. And every business has these seasons that you kind of do that with. And you've got to be able to say, if I'm going to commit a month of work here, I've got to take time off here.
Yep.
We do that in our days, our weeks, our months, our years, our lives. And that's what gives us the ability to continue and be consistent with what we're doing.
No, I 100% agree. And I think I like the way that you described just at the beginning about hustle, because I think it's very important to understand, like you mentioned, that what hustle used to be, right? If you think about all
Right.
these big titans of industry, they still, if you like, I can't remember where I read something recently where they were interviewing a bunch of just, huge billionaires about, what they did on a daily basis. And there was
Yeah.
only one thing that was the same. There was lots of things, right? But only one thing that every single one of them said. And it had something to do with just their own quiet time, right? Meditation or prayer or whatever you experience as that, walking, whatever.
Right.
But all of them, every single one of them had that one thing in common. And, I think when we think about some of these large, companies, we tend to think that they must be super extra busy, which they are in a lot of ways, but they still realize the importance of slowing down and taking a moment. And like I mentioned earlier, there are scientific studies behind the productiveness that comes from coming out of a space of quiet and calm. And, that can be hard when you're not the billionaire, right? That you're having to try to figure out how to make ends meet. However, I think it is important to kind of look at your calendar and really schedule in some quiet time and some downtime. There are scientific studies also that state that the human brain typically can only do about 90 minutes of focus work at a time. So if you
Yeah.
think about a given normal quote unquote work day, it's 7-8 hours. You need to be able to break those up. If you can only do 90 minutes of heavy, actual productive focus work at a time, then you need to be able to have moments in between that to be able to have some downtime to kind of recharge and prepare for your next marathon.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to just I'm going to skim over just a couple things because if we
Mhm.
actually went into the science aspect of it, we would be here forever. So I'm encouraging those that are listening, look some of this stuff up for yourself. But here's a couple of things. One is really research and find the studies that talk about how productivity works in relation to how rested you are. And they have found that the more overtime that you work, the more hours you put in, the less productive you are going to be. And it's really, really powerful when you start looking at that. Like, man, it's basically worthless to work overtime, to pay your employees overtime. You're not getting near the productivity out of them as you would from just a regular type of a thing. So that's number one. Number two is what you just said about that 90-minute aspect. I know Jordan Rayner has actually done quite a bit of study in his own business when he was the CEO of his company, where he would just give each employee about 3 hours out of the day. And he would say, that's your time. Like, nobody interrupts, nobody, like that. You just block off that 3 hour. Now, it's not a consistent, but he did break it into two, ironically, I think it was. And he would have two 90-minute segments where he just got into flow, just focused on anything, turn the phones off, turn the emails, turn all that kind of stuff off, because that's all kind of busy work, and really just focused on getting stuff done. But look up Jordan Rayner. And then the other thing I would mention is, when you talked about that, I think it was Napoleon Hill is the one that did all of those interviews, and some of the stuff that came out of his writings. He's got a lot of really great books that talk about that. Right. Yeah. And then also Jim Collins, and Jim Collins actually went in and did the whole study with the good to great, and why are some businesses great versus some businesses that are good. There's a lot of things in that, but one of the pieces that was consistent, like you just said, was in regards to how the leader themselves was a servant leader, but took time to do the personal development, to really challenge themselves and say, I will step aside to be able to recoup and re-energize, to be able to be effective and to be of service to others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I've even seen it in my own life. Like, I have seen in my own life as the mom of a bunch of kids, and then having businesses and the farm and all the things. I'm busy, right? And for the longest time, I would take away from my own personal time to make sure I got ABC done. And now, while I still have things I have to get done, there are moments I carve out in the day that the kids know, my husband knows, everybody knows that, barring severe emergency, that's not changing, right? That's my time. And I have been able to not only do more, but not have to deal with the level of anxiety that I used to deal with on a daily basis. And, I think it's one of those things that, unless you've experienced anxiety, you don't realize, how debilitating some days that can be. And I know by being able to take that little bit of time and focus on myself and focus on my own mindset and focus on, what is it that I really want to get out of that day, that's calmed my anxiety and I get more done. And, I think it's very small things that we have to do. It's like that old saying though, right? It's so simple, but it's so hard. It's some of the most simple things to do can be the hardest things to implement, because I knew I needed to do it for a long time. And I've talked to other people that are the same way, but it's always, as you mentioned earlier, well, when I get this done, right? When things are quote unquote balanced, when I get this done, well, then I'll go to the gym, or then I'll start to eat healthier, or then I'll start to take a walk, or then I'll start to have quiet time, or whatever the case may be. But I think it's being conscientious. Sleep, that's a big thing now. I do not mess with my sleep. Used to, when I was very much in that hustle and grind mentality, I didn't sleep much, 2 or 3 hours a night. Now a minimum of 7. I do not, even if I don't get it done by the time it's time for me to go to bed, oh well, I'll have to work on it tomorrow.
Yeah, I would really love to turn this conversation into two components, and I think we've really hit on these things. But number one is the why. Why is it so important for us to avoid or get a true definition of the hustle? And then number two is, how do we correct it if we're off track, right? So the why aspect, I actually listened to a guy who very, very successful pastor down in Texas. And as his church was growing, he found himself eliminating his hobbies, eliminating the pieces and the parts that were going on. And that led to what I always use is the path to success and the path to a nervous breakdown is separated by a razor thin line. Because as we're going and as we're doing, we define our success by having a better business, or however you define it, the world defines it. And that's kind of how we define it. So that means that every activity that we have to do is really focused on that business and the success of that business. It's our identity. It's our value. So of course we need to put more into that. Unfortunately, as we put more into that, what we find is that we slowly start to get over into this path of a nervous breakdown, which is where this pastor found himself. And it took him going to a monastery for 30 days in complete silence in order to get healed, in order to be able to have that the detox of his brain from all of the adrenaline that had been kicking in and all of the activities that he was doing that were giving him success. And there were a lot of good things that he was doing at the sacrifice of his own physical well-being.
Yeah.
And we run into that. So the why is we talk about the implodes, and I share this too. I had an implode scenario situation where I broke down because I could not see a simple solution in front of me, and I started beating the crap out of my garage door in front of my family, and that was kind of my wake up call of, dude, you better get your crap together. Something else is going to really start to break down. And there's a whole lot of story behind that, but if you haven't experienced that and you continue to hustle and grind, you will experience something like that. And it's at those moments that you probably going to pick up that phone and call either myself or Maria and say, look, I don't know what to do. You get decision fatigue. You can't really see your way out of it. And I've had people literally sit across from me and describe it like I feel like I'm in a dark room. I have no lights on. I know there's a door somewhere, but I can't find it. And so the reason why we're telling you this and the why behind it is we're trying to give you like a warning, like careful. This is a steep trail. This is a slippery trail. Something could go wrong. Find yourself at the bottom of a cliff and possibly dead because you didn't follow some of these instructions. So I'll let you say a little bit about the why, but this one's a really deep passion with me.
No, I 100% agree. And, I think even sometimes if you're not overloaded to the point of feeling like you're going to break down, you mentioned decision fatigue. That actually is a warning sign that you are doing too much. If you are having such a problem just making simple decisions, that was a warning sign I ignored. I was having problems. I could make the hard decisions, but I couldn't make the simple decision. And what I know now is that's actually a warning sign. That was my brain saying, red flag, red flag. And it was because I was being forced to have to do so much of that heavy decision making. When it came down to making just the simplest decisions, I was just a blank and I just couldn't do it. And so, if you find yourself at that point, it can be, it maybe not seem like an emergency, of course. However, that is a red flag warning sign that, there's something going on, and it could be a simple fix. It could be like, hey, why are you doing this over here? Is that a needle mover? Is that something you need to do right now? Is it a passion? Because for me, when I'm looking at what I'm doing now, and I have to do this on a regular basis, is reevaluate what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. You mentioned in the why. The why for me is the most important thing. My biggest whys are my family, right? That's why I do all the things I do. And then of course myself, and then my businesses, and it's all in layers, right? So when I'm looking at things, I have to ask myself my own why, and that builds into the bigger why. So if you're listening to this, the why of the reasons that you need to look at, what you're doing on a daily basis, what you're doing in your business, and keeping a check on all of that is because of your biggest why. And only you know what your biggest why is, but it's usually your loved ones. It's usually your own health. It's usually, the things that you value. And I think if you
Sometimes
put it in
hard for people to discover.
It is.
It really is. And that sometimes takes a little bit of coaching. It takes a little bit of mentoring. And feel free to reach out on that part of it too. But it's just sometimes it takes a little bit to work with somebody else because we get so entrenched in our own perspectives and our own views. We have, they talk about rose-colored glasses. Well, sometimes you've been living with these glasses. You don't realize how dirty they are until somebody takes them off and cleans them up. And next thing you know, like, oh, I didn't even know that I didn't even see that side of things. So you have to sometimes get an outside perspective. Go ahead. I don't.
No,
I can go into
I think.
how,
No, I think that's important to mention because I think I usually describe it as kind of like the whole typo thing that I talk about all the time, that, you type out the paper and you read it and you're like, oh yeah, this looks good. And you hand it to somebody. They're like, typo. This doesn't make sense. Run on sentence, whatever. And it is like you mentioned, because sometimes we are so close to it. We're so close to it. We know all the things it could be, would be, should be. And we're missing the simple little tweaks that we need to make it successful, to make it fit into our lives the way that we want it to. Because I think that's two different things there. I think for some people, it could be working well, right? They're making the money they want to make and things are going well, but it's not fitting in with the rest of what they want their life to look like. And I think that can be unhealthy on both sides. So I think, I've pretty much hammered the why in. So go ahead and go into the how.
Transition into the how. Because that's the other thing is like we always talk about why is important to be able to have this, why, but how do we correct it? What if we
Yeah.
find ourselves in the middle of that? You may be on the deep end and be like, dude, I am totally wasted and I need help big time. Or you could be like, well, let's go ahead and do some preventative things so that I don't get into the deep end of being completely drained. And there's a couple of things, and obviously we don't have time to go into all of the details. So I want to, in essence, tempt your tummy here because frankly, it's just kind of a pitch, and I'm not meaning it as a sales pitch, but you're going to have to talk to us. You're going to have to, because there's so much here that we have to dig into to be able to really, truly discover what it is for you on an individual basis. So here's a couple of things. If you do nothing else, do this one thing. If you do nothing else, just one thing. That's take 15 minutes in the morning. That's like 0.1% or 0.01% of your day. It's a very, very small fraction of your day. And break it up into 5-minute sections. So there's 3 sections. One is take 5 minutes and find 3 things that you're grateful for. 2 is to be able to listen or read something inspirational. It will change your focus completely when you actually begin the day with gratitude and inspiration or encouragement. And then 3 is just sit silent for 5 minutes. I know this sometimes is the hardest thing in the world to do, but sit silent for 5 minutes. We have an internal voice that wakes up, and sometimes it's uncomfortable because especially guys, we don't really want to listen to it, but we have an internal voice that will help us with a lot of the decision process, allowing us to slow down. Too often the hustle, you don't hear that because we're too busy. We're just going and going. So if you do nothing else, I would say take that 15 minutes and just focus in on that. That is the number one step. If you've done nothing else on any other parts of anything and you're like, well, where do I get started? Start with that. That will make and change the trajectory of your life. There's obviously going to be a lot of other things that we can do, but just start with that.
I would add in move your body too. That's a big thing, which, there's, again, lots of science behind why that needs to happen, but definitely some type of movement. And that doesn't mean that you have to take up, running marathons or, anything major, but even if it's 5 minutes of yoga, I know I did a challenge a while back and it was 5 minutes of yoga, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's daily, every day you do 5 minutes of yoga. And it's funny because the people that were like, oh my gosh, I want to do 5 minutes. Now those are the people that are doing it every day for 20, 30 minutes, right? Because you get in that habit. And exactly. You find that it's not only just a physical benefit. And I could go into that, pain relief and all kinds of things, but it's also just that mental benefit too. And you can pick your time of day to do it. Some people do it first thing in the morning. Some people do it before they go to bed. I actually like to do it both. But it's one of those things to add in because it's kind of gets your blood moving. It actually helps you think, even though you are kind of silent, when you're doing yoga, obviously. But that's another thing that I think I would add in there. And if you're not a yoga person, that's fine. Go out and have a walk or, whatever.
Do a stretching. Just call it stretching.
Stretching, yeah.
Stretching in that aspect is probably the healthiest thing that you can do. And I completely agree. So, we're basically stacking. So 1 is the 15 minutes of your time. 2 is the movement aspect. I would add it. We'll just keep stacking these things. So you guys take as many as you want. 3 is, and everybody's going to like, dude, I don't want to do that. I immediately when I say this, but journaling, the power of journaling. They've actually done a study. This guy was down in Austin and he did a study that if people that are suffering from arthritis, if they started journaling about their physical pain, it helped relieve their physical pain. And that sounds like it's all quack science, but they actually found that by writing down what they were feeling and the pain that they had, they started experiencing less pain.
They were acknowledging it.
There's this physical healing aspect that comes from. So if that can be quantified, imagine what it's doing for your mental health and for your emotional health just to start journaling. There's so many things that tell us that if you write it down, it relieves that stress. It takes it from the aspect of being able to, like, this huge, huge giant that's in your mind to something that's quantifiable. It's by writing, it slows your brain down and makes you actually process it. There's so many things that are on there. And if it's too overwhelming, we've got more tips on how to start a journal. I've got things that I can give you to be able to start. You've got to reach out, because if that's something that interests you, I've turned more guys on to journaling that would swear they would never journal it, just because once you see the benefit, it makes such a huge difference in your life.
Absolutely. Well, and another thing is I have also found that, because I am not a good journaler, I can do a little bit of it, but I've also found drawing. There's different types of journaling, and I'll do
Yes.
one word, but I actually found for me what works the best is focusing on a thought and writing the one thought, whether it's a word or a sentence, but not to try to write pages of crap, because I was driving myself crazy with that. But then I just doodle and draw. I'm a doodler. I kind of sketch all the time, and I would doodle things around it and kind of focus on that word. And, that is another form of journaling.
100%. It's called mind mapping.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that because I have a lot of journals that I started, and I try to like write in big giant paragraph form, and it seemed like another chore to me, but I realized the benefit of it, but I was making it not a benefit because of the way I was doing it. So I made it work for me. And I think, that's the biggest thing with a lot of the things that we talk about is, you don't want it to become another chore, right? You want it to be something that you can implement into your life that serves a purpose. And to be able to do that, you have to somewhat make it your own.
Yeah. Yeah. So I 100% agree with that. I'm glad you added that, because there's different ways people think about different things and how they actually approach it. So that's really great. I think that leads into one of the other biggest components that everybody skips is the power of having a coach. Having somebody be able to give you that perspective, to be able to assign or hold you accountable in a healthy way, to be able to hold you accountable to your commitments and encourage you and support you. And what a coach really does is they draw out that greatness, and that a very talented coach will be able to draw out your greatness and make you a better individual, which is what we all want. So finding that right coach, finding somebody that can walk through some of these challenges with you to be able to say, okay, here's how you can overcome. Here's how we can live that balanced life. Here's how we can prevent the nervous breakdown. This is how we can truly be successful in your business as well as in your family and in your own personal life. But you've got to find a coach. You've got to reach out and really build that part of it. Obviously, Marie and I can help with a lot of the things, and we want you to reach out to us, but that's such a big part of your life.
Absolutely. And it needs to be somebody that works for you. I love the idea of you almost, I hate to use the term date, but I don't know a better way to say it. You almost need to get to know your coach, right? And I wish I could find another word besides date. I'm going to use date, but I'm not meaning it in that way. But you almost need to get to know them, right? Because it's a relationship. It becomes
100%.
a relationship because there's such a level of trust involved in a coaching relationship that you really need to be able to connect. And because I know I've talked with people who have found coaches that, were well respected and, were referred in, and those are great, right? But they never connected. And and they kept sticking with them because they thought it was something they were doing wrong. And it wasn't that from what I had been told, it didn't seem like the coach was doing anything wrong. It didn't seem like they were doing anything wrong. It just seemed like there wasn't that connection. And I think it's so important. There needs to be that connection. You need to be able to connect with your coach because number one, there has to be a level of trust that is established for you to be 100% upfront and honest with the things that are bothering you. You can't be afraid to say these things to your coach, right? And there needs to be a level of understanding where they at least somewhat understand, where you're at in your placement in life and how you feel about things. And, I guess, I'm trying to think of another word besides date. Can you help me?
I would say, yeah. So I would say you resonate with them.
Thanks. Resonates better than date. Cause I'm like, no, Maria, not date. We don't want to say date, but then, and I try to think of a word to be like date. No.
I mean, for the younger generation, I would probably use the word vibe, like we have to vibe with each other. Right. So it's like you're on the same frequency. You're on the same, and what does that actually mean? Well, it means that you hold the same values. You talk the same language. You kind of have similar backgrounds. And I mean, like for me, if I were to go to coach somebody from Australia or Mexico or Jamaica, it probably isn't going to work out because I just don't vibe with that culture. I'm just not there. So you do want to definitely make sure that you resonate with those coaches. And if you're not, or if the coach is not willing to do, whether you want to call it an introduction call or get to know you or a good fit, whatever, if they're not willing to do that, they're probably not a great coach. They're probably not in it to help you. They're in it to make money. I
Yep.
understand their time is worthwhile, but you gotta fit. I mean, you have to fit. Same thing
Yeah.
on the coach's side; they have to be able to fit. And
That's what I
I
was
do
gonna
good fit
say.
calls. Yeah, I do good fit calls, and there's sometimes I'm like, I'm sorry, we're just not a good fit. Again, nothing against the individual, and nothing
Yeah.
against. It's just we're just not a good fit. You can kind of sense it, and you can kind of tell, and it's just like, yeah, no, this isn't going to work. I would tell you this though, this is a really key sign, and you hit it. But I want to just emphasize it. If you can't tell them that you're struggling with something, if you can't tell your coach that you're struggling with something, that should be a red flag saying that that's not the right person. If
Yeah.
you're embarrassed to tell them, like, hey, I am struggling with my finances, or I'm struggling with, if you're embarrassed by that, that's probably not a great relationship right there. And you should probably find somebody else that you can share that kind of stuff. Because how else? Let me put it this way: there was a couple people, and I actually saw this video, and this woman wrote about all of the fears and challenges that women have, but she never really mentioned the men and all of the things that they write. And to her credit, she was really focused on the women target. But men have a lot of the same fears and a lot of the same challenges. We just don't always recognize it. So men are looked up to as long as they're on that white horse, as long as they are the hero. Men can never fall off the white horse. Men can never not be the hero, or else suddenly we're looked down on. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of us that struggle with that aspect. And there's a lot of us that deal with that imposter syndrome, because if we give any kind of an indication of a crack or fear or anything wrong, suddenly we no longer have quote unquote value in society's eyes.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
that is a that is a whole nother hot topic that needs to be dealt with. And that's part, it lends to the hustle. It lends to some of these things, but it's something that we need to recognize that you've got to be transparent, authentic, and be able to say, look, I'm struggling with this. And especially men, you got to break it down, boys. You got to break it down.
Absolutely. Well, and I agree with you. I think that there's obviously lots of similarity in the struggles. I always talk about, moms and women because I'm a mom, I'm a woman, right? But I also recognize that I have a husband, right? I recognize there are struggles on the male side as well. And I think it is important to talk about a lot of these things from the perspectives of, because I can tell you what you experience. I can tell you what men experience from what I've seen as a woman with my husband, but I can't tell you what men as a whole, you know, um, experience. And I think that that is where it is important for people to feel empowered to come up and speak about their own experiences. And I do feel that women tend to speak about their own experiences more than men do. But I do see some men out there now starting to say, a lot more
Yeah,
um details on, hey, I hit rock bottom, hey, I felt like this, hey, I felt like I couldn't speak my true feelings. And I think that is a breath of fresh air, because for so long it wasn't like that, that you
yeah,
had to be you had to show up a certain way. So I think those, we could go on to that for a long time. I think that's another topic for another day, but I agree with you. I think that those are conversations that need to be had.
yeah, yeah. So as far as the stacking, the how, obviously taking the 15 minutes, getting active, journaling is a big part. Finding somebody that resonates with you as a coach, reaching out to them, building your community. Those are all pieces of how to overcome this hustle, or allow the fall of the hustle culture to continue. You've got to be able to break that stuff. So
Absolutely.
I don't know if you want to mic drop it or just end it on that, but
So,
that's
yeah,
really what it is. So
I only have one more thing that I'm going to say, and I'm just going to say that, you need to sit and think about, again, why you are wanting to hustle in the first place. What are you wanting to achieve? Why are you doing it in the first place? Because, a lot of times we're doing it for the sake of doing it. We're busy for the sake of being busy, and we're not really tying it back to why we're doing it in the first place. Because again, if we're doing it because of our like for a lot of people who start their businesses, they do it because they want to spend more time with their families. They want to be able to make their own schedule, right? Those are two big reasons that people start businesses. But then what ends up accidentally happening is that they spend less time, right? They're more busy because not only are they having to show up and do the work, but they're having to find the work, they're having to create the work, right?
Yep.
So I think it's being honest with why you're doing it and what do you need to do to make sure it fits into your biggest why. So that's all
Yep.
I've got.
No, I love it. I love it.
Oh.
I'm good.
All
I
right.
mean, like we could talk forever, but I'm good. And I really, really encourage you, if anything that we said resonates with you today, reach out to us and let us know. And we were here to help. We really want to be able to serve you in that way.
Absolutely. And until next time, bye.